Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call to order the May meeting of the Delaware County Juvenile Detention Board of Managers. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A couple of points of housekeeping. One, I'd like to mention that we did have an executive session on, David, was it Wednesday or Thursday or Friday? On Thursday of this past week to discuss matters of public safety. And another housekeeping point in response to some requests we had from the public and after discussion amongst the board, going forward, we will be moving back the start time for these meetings to 5:30 p.m. I hope that while there's not going to be any time that is perfect for everyone, that seemed to be better for a majority as well as what we've heard from the public. So we'll go with that. All right. First round of public comment. And as always, this is for items that are specifically on the agenda for tonight. There will be another round of public comment at the end for matters more broadly about juvenile detention. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address the board? Hearing none. And also one other housekeeping one. I wanted to mention that Shakima Fulmore Townsend is on virtually. Shakima, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear everyone.
All right, great. All right, an approval of the minutes of the March 21st meeting. Is there actually, this should be April, should it not be?
Yes.
When was the April meeting? Okay, so just a quick adjustment to that. Is there a motion to
I will move
approve?
that we approve the minutes for the April 18th meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, the report from the Juvenile Court and Probation Services. Is there anyone here from, you're still not here today? All right, well, I guess we're gonna have to skip that. David, your turn.
Can everyone hear me well? All right, good afternoon, board. Just want to take the opportunity to kind of run through some of our census, predominantly since I've started here, January of last year. If you all recall, around this same time last year, we had a presentation, actually was in July. What I hope to cover today, last year's weekly census, give an overview of that, share the data that we have as it relates to the resources that we need in terms of detention, dive in a bit to the youth demographics here, and also kind of give our highs as it relates to statistics here in detention. As you all know, Wednesday of this week, the 17th, the actual design will be going forward. So it's important for you all to hear out the census as it relates to that. So what we want to start with is kind of our weekly census here. And what this graph here shows is our total census, and what you'll see highlighted in orange is the percentage of the census that was juvenile direct files. Again, these are young people, these are minors who their alleged offenses would qualify in the adult system. So very serious allegations as it relates to these young people. Just kind of looking at the data, a few key summary points. All of last year, 2022, our weekly census averaged roughly around 7 young people. The highest amount of young people we've seen in detention was 12. That was in October of last year. 53% again of our census has been those juvenile direct files. So again, very higher risk kids. And then in 2022, the highest amount of young people we've seen that were juvenile direct files at one point in time in detention was 5. Again, just to kind of give more history as it relates to direct files here in the county. Again, last year we presented out this data. But when I got here, I wanted to look at the history of young people who had committed these alleged offenses, and prior to the federal laws changing, would have resided at George W. Hill. So if you look at 2016 and 2021, that number ranges. If you average that number out, the county averaged around 23 young people a year who fit that criteria of a juvenile direct file. Now, I'm happy to say that as of last year, we only saw 9 in detention, and that's actually somewhere around a 60% decrease. We also, in partnership with our courts, really tried to track the incidents or the weeks in which a young person scored for detention, and we did not have the resource for that young person. So again, summarizing that, out of the 52 weeks, 23 weeks reported in which JPO let us know that a young person scored for detention, but they didn't have that resource available. From March 4th to December 1st. And again, JPO started reporting this data to us in March. We saw about 45 incidents reported. Again, this isn't youth specific, but these are incidents, so it can be one young person involved in multiple incidents. I guess for us, just for clarity, we treated incidents as on an individual basis. The most incidents that we've seen in 1 week was 7. That was back in June of last year. And the highest need for secure beds that we saw at one point in time last year was 11. And what we did when we predicted need, we calculated the current amount of young people in detention, as well as the incidents turned away. So if you look at that very first line on March 4th of last year, there was 1 turnaway incident in the month, in that week of March. We currently had 6 young people in detention. So, if we would have had a local detention center, the need would have been 7 for that week. That's the way it kind of worked out. And again, June 3rd of last year is where we had 4 people in detention, and there was 7 incidents reported, and the need would have been 11. That was the highest need we've seen throughout the year. And of those 23 weeks that incidents reported, it averaged around the need for 8 incidents fell within there. About 50% of our reports reported the need for additional spacing. Next slide kind of shows what that looks like on a monthly basis of last year. So again, we looked at intakes, which really was a percentage change in our census. For instance, in the month of January, we started off with 2 young people in detention. The end of the year, we've had, at the end of January, we had 6 people in detention. So that was an increase of 4. Again, we categorize that as an intake. So again, we've had, we didn't have any incidents reported because at that point in time, JPO wasn't reporting that piece. But that's kind of how we calculated that number. So you see on a monthly basis what the need was as it relates to the incidents that were reported in which we needed a resource and didn't have one. And then we also calculated what the monthly intake was for each specific month. So again, by estimation, June of last year was the highest amount in which a youth was either in detention or would have been considered, and that was 17.
Can I ask about that number, the
Sure.
16? That's 16 that we didn't have a bed for, but did all 16 need a bed, or were some of them appropriate for diversion?
So again, this is based off of JPO's assessment tool, and what they report is these are young people who have scored for detention. Now, I'm certain that they were given an alternative, right? And I think the more impactful number is, as it relates to 16, how many of those young people actually showed up to court, right? Had their day in court, and what was decided for them moving on, right? Because I think that's, in its truest sense, that's what detention guarantees you. It guarantees you a day in front of a judge, and then therefore his or her honor is going to decide what's next for them. So, if you really want to measure the impact of the lack of bed, it would really have to be the result. So, was that young person put on a monitor, put back in the community, and therefore did he or she show up to a court date, right? And was, whatever was determined is determined, right? I think that's what detention kind of guarantees you. But I think for what we'll work with in terms of lack of data, right, we're just trying to make emphasis around what the need is here.
Just a couple other questions on that number. Are we certain that there isn't any double counting in there, that these are 17 discrete youth, or were there any recurs?
Right. So again, we receive de-identified data, right? So again, this could be one young person in 17 incidents, right? Or this could be a group of 5. Again, I think for us, as we're trying to maybe consider worst case scenario, I treat it as if this was 17 different individuals, but to be clear, we don't have clarity on that.
Yeah, I will say it's such an outlier from any other number that
Sure.
we have that
Sure.
something seems a little strange about that. And I guess either there was like some big incident
Sure.
or in light of the fact that you can't be certain that there weren't repeats within there, I think there's a decent chance that there may be. And I think the other point is in terms of how long a youth may be in detention, this presumes that every one of those 17 would still be in detention at one time. Whereas, again, this is assumption on top
Sure,
of assumption.
sure,
One,
sure.
we're assuming these are 17 discrete youth.
Yep.
2, we're assuming that each of those 17 were being detained at the same time, right? And not that there might have been someone who was detained for a couple of weeks and, was no longer.
Yeah, we based this figure off of an allegation, right, that went before our juvenile courts. They were scored for detention, and at the time they tested, there wasn't a resource available, right? So it could be incidents involving multiple young people. We didn't have any months like that prior or after, so it could have just been a very rare incident where a lot of young people may have come in contact. But there's a lot of unknowns. I'm just, we're reporting the data that we receive, and ultimately we would have to take a deeper dive if we had an opportunity to.
David, I realize it's anonymous, but
Yep.
is there not any way to clarify without actually getting any names that, this was any of those 17 were the same? Is that something we could ask?
We can look into it.
Okay.
We've attempted, but we can look into it and see what we can get out of it, if there's
Yeah,
any
that'd be great.
additional data.
But nevertheless, I think it's a useful data point,
Sure.
although I don't think we should, put too much, given the
Sure.
assumption on top of assumption that's in there.
Sure.
Actually, I might remember what might have been happening at that time. There was an incident in Sharon Hill or Darby, that Sharon Hill Darby area,
Mhm.
that there were a lot of young people that were involved. I think it was a shooting at a game or something like that. And I think it was around June the 3rd that it took place. And so that might be the reason why that number is there. Don't quote me on it, but
Yeah.
I just remember there was a big incident around a graduation or something like that. And there were a number of young people that were involved in it at that particular time.
Sure.
So if they had all been detained, that would give you a number like that.
With several different counts for each one,
Yeah.
so, right,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well, we'll continue to look for the facts. In terms of the next slide, we really wanted to.
Before you go to the next slide, I
Sure.
do have a question. Similar to what Kevin was saying.
Sure.
It's unclear to me is it unknowable if it's duplicated or unduplicated, or has it just not been shared with you? In other words, clearly somebody somewhere has access to the information that you're asking for, but is there anything preventing them from sharing the level of detail that would allow you to either deduplicate the number if there is, or substantiate that they're actually individual people? I guess I'm trying to understand, what's the barrier? Are there any barriers in place to know that answer?
Well, in terms of the information we received, that was the only really inference we can come to. As it relates to, any more specific, deeper dive, it would have to be our partners at probation. I'm not privy to the information as it relates to specific. So, the same weekly census that we all receive, that's how I'm able to break down these numbers. It really isn't, much more than what we all receive, which is an email of, disaggregated data. And at that point in time, we also receive an email around incidents that happen. We discuss it on our executive session as it relates to public safety. So, the information that you all have, I have as well. And that's pretty much as far as it goes.
Is it possible to request, well, I guess the request that I would be making is it possible for us in that report to have the number of unique IDs, not to compromise what they send, because I know exactly the report that you're talking about, but when that information is received with us, could it actually state this represents 5 unique IDs or this represents 3 unique IDs? Because then that would tell us if it's, one person maybe showing up multiple times within a month or multiple times over a reporting period or not. So I wonder if there's a way to balance the way the data is coming to us without compromising any issues that they might have with data sharing. So just that would be something I would love to look into. And I don't know if I should directly email in response to the report that we're getting, or if that's something that you could request for them. But I think that would be helpful. It would sort of eliminate some of these questions that we're having.
No worries. I'm happy to request on behalf of the board.
Thank you.
No worries. So next slide again takes a bit of a deeper dive into our weekly census as it relates to gender. Just again, a high level overview. We average, it's about a 66-34 split. The chart next to it kind of gives some of the historic numbers here as it relates to gender. So for whatever reason, our young ladies is trending up. We've historically averaged around 20% of our census, about 14% increase. And as you all know, over the past couple of weeks, a majority of our young people in detention have been young ladies. So I don't know if that's a trend that's going to continue, but it's just something, I guess, worth highlighting. So most amount of males we've seen at one point in time on a weekly basis was 10, and the highest amount of young ladies we've seen was 4. And again, this is just kind of high level summary as it relates to our highs. Just kind of want to summarize that piece. So again, on a weekly basis, the highest amount of young people we've seen is 12. The highest reported need on a weekly basis has been 11. For the month has been 17. Again, obviously we have to take a deeper dive into June of last year to see, what that looks like. As I said, the highest amount of young men who were in detention on a weekly basis was 10. Highest amount of young ladies will be 4. And the most juvenile direct files we've seen at one point was 6, and that was actually this year. Last year's high was 5. It's important for us to talk about. I know our chair and our co-chair have asked me to explore the possibility of the amount of beds in the facility. Right? I think we've collectively, based off the numbers that we had, thought that 24 was the number that should have been considered. Mr. Mann has also asked me to consider 18. And I think a lot of what, this data sharing was a part of, just in terms of, is 18 doable? And again, I think we haven't seen 18 young people at one point in time, just for the board's consideration, something to think about. And then my last slide, as always, right, this year, just kind of let you know where the numbers are trending. And I would say the only real difference is, again, we've again reached our peak in terms of direct files. So 6 we've seen at one point in time. Last year, the highest we've seen was 5. And again, if you look at the percentage of our direct files who are in detention, we averaged around 50% last year. We're at 3/4 this year. So again, our young people remain to be the most serious young people as it relates to the juvenile justice field. And open to any questions.
Thank you, David. And as Mr. Azari alluded to, the vice chair and I did ask for Mr. Azari to run these numbers again, in light of the fact that, one, more time has passed. I think since the last time we looked at numbers like this, it's been at least 6 or 7 months. And so given the trends that we've seen over the last several years of each year, the number of youth being detained has declined. That has in fact continued into 2023, where we're averaging 6.3 versus last year. It hasn't dropped a lot, but down from 6.6. And also, as we sort of hit this point where we're not yet committed to what the right number of beds is to build, this seemed like the right time to kind of look at this again and reassess whether 3 pods of 8, with 1 being primarily female and 2 being primarily male, if that's right or if that's too much, if building to a 3 times 6 is more appropriate given the census counts we've seen. I don't think there's any like absolute right answer here. But I do think that there are pros and cons either way. And I'll kind of open it up the floor to have the conversation. And I will also say, I don't think we need to make any determination today. I'd like for board members and the public at large to have the opportunity to, provide any comments they have, and for board members to continue to sort of track down any part of this data-driven exercise that we need to feel informed about what we will recommend to the council.
So the only piece that I saw that I guess I still have some question about, only because it seems to arise, it's been arising everywhere, and that is young people, either two. One is extremely young people. So young people that may not fall, like if the average age here is, let's say 14 or 16, if there was a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old or whatever that falls into that group, they certainly don't need to be with the older kids. So can we think about provision for that? And then the second is people who identify as gender neutral or have some other kind of special needs in that regards. Are we thinking about that? Even if we never use the space, where would that fit into that number? And just kind of keeping that in the forefront, just because it just continues to arise.
Rabbi, I agree wholeheartedly. We will.
David, those are questions I think we've talked about before, right? And so at least with regards to younger boys, I've heard you say before that they oftentimes are actually housed with the girls.
Yep. So, and we had the opportunity, many board members as well as my team, to visit a lot of different centers and really pick a lot of different ideas. And I think one thing that we saw, as we knew we were downsizing, and with downsizing comes less space, we asked a lot of centers as it relates to how are they creative, right? So Bucks County, one of their housing units that are designed for young ladies, they also place their younger males within that pod, which is a co-ed pod, and it was something that was very different. It isn't done very often, but they found that their younger guys were targets of the 16, 17-year-olds, and the young ladies in the facility took more of like mother figures toward the younger guys, and that's something that they had success with that we hope to implement. Myself and Mr. Walker, we developed an LGBTQ rights policy that it's going to be implemented in our center. So if a young person, whatever gender a young person identifies as, they'll have the opportunity to house within those facilities. So yeah, we have to be creative. There are times where young people cannot be housed together based off of several different factors. And I think, when we wanted to break the 24 into 3 different living pods, or whether it's 18 or 24, we thought about that flexibility. We built in 2 observation rooms, right? So a young person has suicide ideations or an infectious, controllable disease. We have a room that's air controlled, so things of that nature. So I think, we did our best, with the folks who I believe are the experts, and Mike Resnick and Nelson Walker, around potential issues. And at that point in time, I think we have a lot of at least solutions around, potential issues that can come up. We're never going to have all the answers, right? But I think the flexibility of the space that we built within design allows us to address most of them.
I think it's also worth adding, with a local detention facility in place, it's not as if the relationships we have with other counties and other facilities outside of the county suddenly disappear. I think either if there's a extenuating circumstance where we have the need to sort of have more separation than 3 pods allows, that may be a scenario where we reach out to one of our neighboring counties and say, we need to do something here to get some help. And I think we all know that there is actually quite a few empty beds in a few of our neighboring counties. So whether it's because of a scenario like the one that you talked about, Reverend, or if it's that, we build and there is a moment in time where we have a big inflow and we do exceed it. I don't think we're in a position where, there are no options. We've been living for, 2 years now without any detention facility and 18 more beds locally than 0 is a huge difference. It doesn't mean that, we wouldn't have options if we exceed those beds. Any other thoughts from board members?
I guess I'm thinking about the many different reasons a youth could be in detention. I just made a couple of notes. It may be, well, look, this is the 5th time that you've been in front of a juvenile court judge and you've done X, Y, and Z, therefore you need to be in detention. Or it could be that it's because there has to be a transfer to adult or the nature of the charges. It seems to me that there are a number of different reasons that Director Irizarry has indicated. And I think one of the things we ought to think about is what those numbers look like in terms of who has the most need. So if it's somebody who's had, it's the 5th violation and the second placement, that child may need a different set of circumstances as opposed to a child who has 1 violation, but it's very, very serious, or something where the child is in some way in need of some medical treatment that can't be done there. So I guess what I'm saying is that there are so many different reasons why a child should be there that we ought to be looking at what those are with probation. So probation can tell us, okay, these are the kids that we think are going to have X, Y, and Z needs, and these are the kids that are going to need A, B, and C needs. We need to hear, I think, more from probation. I think you've already asked for that information, but I don't feel as though we've gotten enough information to make a more informed decision about that, because you can't just say, yep, I know which child is going to be in detention and why. It's just too varied. It really, really is.
Yeah, and I worry about us overbuilding because we don't have that information. These numbers that we're looking at today, the census numbers, are inflated because they don't break out the incidents. And even working from that, we're still building more than the actual max ever. So I do feel, I agree that we need to have a clearer picture of what the census numbers mean when it comes time to settle on a number. And I do think there is harm in overbuilding because the beds are there and it becomes easier when there's a difficult decision, they're there. So I would add to the pleas that we're hearing today for more clarity about the census numbers.
Any other board members would like to weigh in at this point or ask any questions? I think there's also one other point to it, and I would reduce it on the priority list, but I think it's at least worth throwing into the mix, which is we asked Mr. Irizarry to go back to the architects and ask what would be the fiscal impact if we reduced from 3 pods of 8 to 3 pods of 6. And I think the estimate was about $500,000 in savings to the county if we were to do so. Last point to that, and it's really that given the design, the fact that the 3 pods, they sort of work outward away from the main corridor. I think it's worth noting, if for whatever reason, circumstances really change and this multi-year trend of reducing the reliance upon detention If that reverses course and suddenly kind of goes backwards and you see increases, it's not as if we will be structurally stuck. There is the opportunity to, knock down a wall and add more beds. That wouldn't be ideal. These are thick walls. You wouldn't really want to do that, but I wouldn't want board members to sort of view this as if we, build to a certain level and it, is determined down the road that we needed more, we're not fully kind of stuck there. So that's the last point I'll make. I think it's always good to get more information, and particularly around the turnaways, I'd like to get more clarity on that. But I think based on the nature of my questions, I'm of the mindset that I think 3 pods of 6 is adequate. We have not once in 18 months or whatever it is, close to 18 months, hit the high water mark of 12 for male beds or 6 for female beds. And even if we were, as I said earlier, we still have these contracts in place with neighboring counties. There is some collegiality here of helping one another out when you have circumstances where you need to, detain a neighboring county's youth. So that's where I'm at. And to Councilwoman Schaefer's point, I do think there's some concern about, overbuilding. I think if you have extra beds there, those marginal cases, they may go more toward detention, where I would rather not see that be the case, to be frank. But like I said, I don't think we need to make a decision today. But I would like for us to sort of continue this thought process and board members to get answered what it is they feel they need in order to have a clear opinion on what's right.
Can I ask a follow-up question that is not directly related to the amount of beds we build? It's more related to the census information. The turnaway numbers are cases in which probation identified, the assessment tool identified that this person should be in detention. Instead, they were not. They were sent home with a monitor, sent home, some other diversionary tactic was used. Do we also, for all of those numbers that we have here by month, do we have numbers of when that turnaway turned into a problem? They went missing in action or whatever they call it.
Or didn't.
Or didn't.
Yep.
I mean, that would be really interesting to see over this period of reporting.
Yeah, and I agree, right? If we're really trying to measure the impact of the lack of local detention center, the most important question is when a young person's turned away, scores for detention is turned away, what was the result of that, right? So was this young person placed back in the community on a monitor, and again, still successfully showed up to court and, was given his or her day in court and, decided what was next? I think those are most important numbers, right? Because if we had a collective of 45 incidents turned away and 40 of them showed up to court, then that kind of shows the impact, that impact, right? You didn't necessarily need detention, although they scored for it, they still were able to show up. So we can continue to ask those questions.
And importantly, the 5 who don't show up, what commonality is there
Sure.
that that we could learn from, that when a child has this particular characteristic in their, I just feel like there's a missing piece here.
Agreed.
So after that, just I guess one more general piece. I know, and maybe you guys are already having these conversations, but certainly the input of the judges and the DA's office as it relates to what they, again, I'm not a proponent of overbuilding this in any way, shape, or form. But we certainly want to make sure the judges have whatever resources they feel as though they need to have, but with all the questions answered that you already mentioned. Like, so if I send you on a monitor and you report, then I don't need to we don't need to do a bed, right? So, yeah, so I don't know where that information comes from, but I'm with Councilwoman. I just really would love to hear more what the whole picture looks like versus kind of just the numbers, because the numbers don't lie, numbers can lie.
Well, it is even just the numbers. Like, we have heard anecdotal input from probation that there have been incidents, but how many out of this, these many, many turnaways? And that, I mean, in a way, this has been a 2-year experiment. When you don't have the kids, I mean, the beds, and you have to be more discerning about who you put in detention, what happens? And that's the part we haven't really gotten an answer to.
But to your question, Reverend, I know that at least the district attorney's office has been made aware that this is something we're in consideration for. And I don't want to put words into the district attorney's mouth, but
Yep. So I had the opportunity to meet with our DA last week. I believe it was Thursday. And I really just asked him, there's a recent report from the JCJC as it relates to detention specific in the Southeast. They have some specific to Eastern PA. It showed that, the need compared to what was available, really in different regions. I think there was over 100 extra beds as it relates to the need. But I asked DA Solstheimer just in terms of he had a preference between the 18 and 24. And he, a lot like you, Mr. Madden, believes that both situations puts us way better than we are now, and didn't put in a formal recommendation, but would support both. I asked our chief probation officer just in regards to what she believed, and she kind of stuck to the formal recommendation of the JCJC as it relates to 22. And we've continued to ask the questions. We've met with the Juvenile Judges Court Commission. We had an opportunity to sit down last week as well with our president judge, with leadership from the JCJC, and our chief probation officer. And what I will say is this: throughout the country, as well as specific here in Pennsylvania, there is much more interest in the community engagement aspect of this work in terms of alternatives and in terms of preventive programming. So we had the opportunity, this is unrelated to this particular topic, but we had the opportunity to kind of present out our project here and how we're using data to inform where young people are coming in contact, and really having a more proactive approach to primary prevention and even the reentry piece. And, they're very excited about that, and, they support us. And at some point in time, I think if we're successful, they have interest of us coming out and speaking to the rest of the state around what we're doing. So, I think 18 puts us in a good space. But again, I'm deferring to the board just in terms of to what they're most comfortable with.
All right. Any other questions or comments from board members on this topic today? Hearing none. Anything else from you, Mr. Azari?
Nothing.
Again, the approval of the agreement with the architect for the demolition is before council on Wednesday evening. All right, old business. Any old business? Any new business from board members?
I don't know if it's new business. I just made some notes here in thinking about this in terms of information that we may want to use that may be helpful to Mr. Irizarry, which would be what number of juveniles, if any, are in detention pre-adjudication? What number are in there post-adjudication? And what's the average number of violations for juveniles in detention? And what is the most serious of those violations? What's the residence/school district of the juveniles who are in detention? And I know we have it by gender and by race. And I think from Reverend's point, one of the biggest things was truancy. What is the situation with truancy? And is the truancy coming out of a particular school district? More so than any other school district, where we find that those individuals who are truant in X school district and have other issues in detention are more likely to be there. And finally, this is interesting. Who are the JPO officers who are making the recommendation for detention? a little touchy, but I said it. That's all I have.
Right. Next round of public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to address the board today? Hearing none. Board member comment?
Well, we received today, just about an hour ago, the responses to the requests from Dr. Taylor's desk for a whole host of data, and none of us have had the time to go through it at this point. But I did quickly page through it, and I saw one number that I was taken aback by, and that was the number of children that we have in probation at this given point, which was just shy of 1,400. Well, I think it was 1,392, which seemed extraordinarily high to me. And I'm wondering, I don't know if that's high or not. It seems high to me. And I wondered if there is some way we can benchmark ourselves. Or if we have some professionals who can help us benchmark ourselves. Because if that is high, I think that's a pretty strong indicator that we need to do something about that. That's a lot of resources.
Yep.
That could probably be spent helping the kids who really need it. So I wanted to call that out. I mean, I'm sure there'll be other things that come out of those documents, but when in the 20 minutes I had to look through, I found that number and I wanted to call it out and ask that we get more intelligence about what that means.
I would agree. And I mean, just going back to what we were saying earlier, I just think that the relationship with the schools, not, we're getting things after the fact, but as has been pointed out to us over and over again, all of this starts either in the community or it starts in the school setting. And my interaction with various school systems, their level of tolerance for solving problems internally is becoming less and less. And it therefore winds up putting young people in the hands of the courts versus what used to happen with us, I don't know about you guys, but me, you get sent to the principal's office and, I don't think they paddle people anymore, but, it was kind of handled there internally. There was not any, there wasn't some of the things that happen to young people today as it relates to that. So I think all of that, even though it's not necessarily in our jurisdiction, we need to look at it because we get the outcome of people not doing what they need to do at their level. So I agree 100.
I think that's helpful. And to Your Honor's point, maybe this further understanding of the data and what's actually happening behind the higher level numbers we have, maybe that doesn't really play a part in whether it's 3 pods of 6 or 3 pods of 8 or whatever. But I think given the fact that you have 3 members of council on this board, the fact that we have people on this board who represent a wide range of backgrounds, I do think it's really important for us to understand what's happening behind these numbers, because we do have, outside of just the narrow purview of this board per se, what we learn out of this can be beneficial for us in the other roles that we play, whether it's our interactions with human services or the DCIU or whatever the case may be. This is information that I think and understanding that I think we gather collectively that can really be beneficial in other ways.
Absolutely.
This doesn't happen in a vacuum. All right, anything else for today from board members? Hearing none, just another reminder that next month's meeting will start at 5:30, and we'll plan to stick with that time unless we change again. If nothing more, entertain a motion to adjourn. I'm sorry, ma'am, the public comment had already happened. But after the meeting, I'm happy to speak with you. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
A second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? You guys have it, and we are adjourned.